Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven speaking to you from south of Jerusalem. Today is the 19th day of the month of Iyar, 5783. It's May 9th, 2023. Today is 34 days, which are 4 weeks and 6 weeks of the Omer. Getting closer to the 49-day total, which leads up to the 50th day, which is, of course, Shavuot. So it's in just over 2 weeks we'll be celebrating Shavuot. This coming Shabbat, we read once more a double Torah reading, a double portion, double parasha, Behar-Bechukotai, which brings us all the way to the end of the book of Leviticus. Begins with chapter 25, verse 1 in the book of Leviticus and concludes chapter 27, verse 34. We have just concluded, because it is nightfall now, and we have just concluded Lag BaOmer, which is the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, which is a holiday which has just become more and more popular over the years here in modern-day Israel. And many people celebrated Lag BaOmer all over the country today. And many tens of thousands of people celebrated in its central spot of celebration, Mount Meron, Har Meron, in the Galilee, near the town of Sfat, which is the burial site of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is the author of the Zohar, the Book of Splendor. It is the preeminent text of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism, and its origins are shrouded in mystery, and the origins of the holiday of Lag BaOmer are shrouded in mystery, and that just seems to make sense because Kabbalah itself is a dive into the mystery. It's the hidden meaning, the most inner, hidden, highest meanings of the Torah are revealed in the Zohar. But you have to study for a long time to gain any real understanding of what the Zohar has to teach you, because it's very deep and it's a very particular vocabulary and language. It's a very beautiful book with all different parts to it. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived in the 2nd century. I've been posting things about him this week on Facebook. This was during the time of the Roman rule, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was not a fan of the Roman rule, and he was very critical of it, and his criticisms were conveyed to the Roman authorities. Someone snitched on him, and they decided they wanted to arrest him, and who knows what. It was the quite common Roman custom at the time to simply kill anybody who spoke against their rule, and kill them in the most horrific ways. And in fact, Rabbi Akiva would himself be martyred by the Romans in a most horrific way. But Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Elazar fled. So they got word that the Romans were after them. They fled and they hid in a cave in Mount Meron in Israel and stayed there for 12 years. They would bury themselves up to their necks each day and study the Torah. And a carob tree miraculously grew at the entrance to the cave, and that was their nourishment, as well as a well that was miraculously, a spring which miraculously appeared. And they studied, delved into the deepest depths and highest heights of Torah knowledge. And after 12 years in the cave, they emerged. They got word that the Romans were no longer after them. And as they're walking, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai saw Jewish farmers working their fields, and he was offended by this. He was very upset. He said, "Why are they doing such mundane, such profane things working in the field. They should be studying. And a bat kol, which literally means a daughter of a voice. A bat kol is like a heavenly voice that would sometimes call out to our sages of this era in Jewish history. And a bat kol called out from heaven and said, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, go right back into that cave. For all that you've learned, you haven't learned a thing. And so he went back in for one more year, he and his sons, so it's a total of 13 years. And what he learned in that last year was a little humility, I guess. And that reality is that not everybody can spend their days and nights buried up to their necks in a cave studying Torah. And people need to put food on their table, and people need to earn a living, and people need to work their fields. So the Lag BaOmer is the Hilula or the yahrzeit, or the day of the passing, the day of the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And you may say, what a funny thing to do to celebrate, because it's a very joyful day to celebrate the day of his dying. But we're celebrating the day of his soul being raised up to its rightful place in heaven. And he, I believe, called upon people to celebrate on the day of his passing. So that's what we do. The earliest mention earliest written mention of Lag BaOmer, I think, is an 11th century text from northern France. So we don't have any record of it earlier than that, but if it's already mentioned in the book as a custom, obviously it existed for some time before that. And again, the other tradition that's associated with Lag BaOmer is the cessation of a plague that took the lives of 24,000 of Rabbi Akiva's students, which began on the first day of the Omer, I guess, and concluded on the 33rd day. So this day is a day of celebrating the cessation of that plague, which took these 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, he was the greatest of all the rabbis of this time. So this was a huge loss. And as we've been talking about and posting on Facebook, and in a beautiful YouTube video, Temple Mount Moment video for this week, about this particular issue, this very subject, there's tremendous evidence, written evidence by our sages, that it wasn't really a plague which took the lives of his students, but they had enlisted in Bar Kokhba's army, which had the support of Rabbi Akiva, who declared that Bar Kokhba, who was a warrior, a general, a very good general, was Moshiach, because he would lead Israel to independence. He would shake off the yoke of Roman rule and restore Jewish independence. And his uprising began in the year 132 of the Common Era, and they met with incredible initial success, defeating Roman legions and liberating Jerusalem for some time, and actually establishing a state and minting coins, which we have discovered many hundreds of coins from the Bar Kokhba era of that time. And there's some evidence to suggest that they even were able to renew for some time the daily offerings and begin the building of the temple. But the Romans, who suffered very serious, devastating defeats at the hands of the Bar Kokhba warriors in their early battles, early confrontations, had to regroup and bring in legions from far-flung areas of the Roman Empire, and in order to ultimately quell the rebellion. And I think that one of the hopes of the people who were involved in the rebellion was that other areas would also rebel, so that the Romans would not be able to focus all their military might in Judea. And that didn't materialize the way they had hoped to. And so the final confrontation was in the city of Beitar, which is in the area today in Israel known as Gush Etzion, which is just south of Jerusalem, a beautiful area. And it's actually an Arab town called Batir, which is built on the ruins of Beitar. And the Beitar was devastated, and the Romans did not hold back. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed in battle. Many more died in famine, which was a result of all this destruction, and of course disease. And at this point was when the Romans really began to make life unbearable for Jews in Judea. And so many had to flee, and many were enslaved. This came just 70 years or 60 some years after the first rebellion, in the year 70, when the temple was destroyed. And this would really put an end to Jewish hopes of regaining their independence for nearly 2,000 years. If you study the history, there were other rebellions and uprisings over the next 100 or so years. None, of course, with the might or fury of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, but and none with any success, really. But the Jewish desire for independence and willing to fight for it was very strong and very much alive, and it took really what you could say was the first Holocaust. And some historians even do regard the Roman massacre of so many Jews during that time as a genocide. This was the Holocaust that led to the long exile, which only ended after a second Holocaust in the 20th century. So the nearly 2,000 years of exile were sandwiched between these two horrific events. But so after that, the rabbis, sages, the suggestion is that they did not want to inflame more passion amongst their fellow Jews and encourage people to engage in uprisings that were destined to fail and destined to cause more hardship for the Jewish communities at large. So they said that the Rabbi Akiva's students died in a plague and not in battle. But there were definitely some written hints. For example, the word shmad is used to refer to these 24,000 victims of the plague. And the word shmad is used almost exclusively in this context, referring to violent death by war or massacre. So even though they changed the narrative, they didn't hide it altogether. And again, with modern times, modern archaeology, they've uncovered many other things, including letters written by Shimon Bar Kokhba, the leader of the revolt. Very interesting man. Again, we've posted things on our Facebook page. You can learn more about Bar Kokhba if you go to our Facebook page. And if you just do a simple search on Bar Kokhba, you'll find all sorts of fascinating things. And they've discovered much more about him in modern times than we knew in earlier times. Anyway, that's the Bar Kokhba revolt, which is connected to Lag BaOmer. We mentioned the Hilula, the celebration of the passing of the great tzaddik, the great righteous Rabbi Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, which is understood to be the gateway to our geula, our redemption, because the knowledge that we can gain from the Zohar can lead us to the geula, to the redemption. This past day, this morning, or in the middle of the night, the Israeli Air Force bombed a number of targets in Gaza, taking out the top leadership of the Islamic Jihad, which is a associate terror group of Hamas, which rules Gaza. And the Islamic Jihad in Gaza has been very active in firing missiles into Israel over the past month, and of course organizing and sending out terrorists. And so Israel, with pinpoint accuracy, took out 3 of their top leaders, and that was in the middle of the night. And then the authorities told people to be careful, because we're expecting a retaliation of missiles. And it's always happened in the past when Israel has taken out leadership, sometimes hundreds of missiles, sometimes thousands of missiles. And certainly the areas around Gaza itself, the Jewish communities, schools were canceled today, and people were told to stay home, to be very careful. And of course, people are on alert. Should missiles start to fall, people will run to their safe rooms, to their bomb shelters. But it hasn't happened yet. It's still been very quiet. But that's the news of the past 24 hours. So we've had celebrations for Lag BaOmer. One of the things people do on Lag BaOmer to celebrate is to have bonfires. Again, nobody really knows where these customs began. And fortunately, many tens of thousands of people celebrated at Mount Meron. And if you recall, about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a horrible catastrophe at the celebration where structures collapsed and a number of people were crushed and killed, including some very young people. And so last year, after preparing the area to making it safer, and with tremendous security, they had the celebration, and it was a little bit muted last year because of all that. But this year, I think they were able to further fortify the area, and many more people were there and celebrating, and it went off without a hitch, thank God. So that's the news here in Israel. Let's look at our parshiot, at our concluding readings for the book of Leviticus. And of course, Leviticus began with the very first day of the month of Nisan, which was the day of the inauguration of the tabernacle. And so we learn all about the preparation by the Kohanim, the teaching of the Kohanim for their service in the tabernacle. We learned about the first day of the tabernacle, what happened, and then we learned all sorts of rules about korbanot, about offerings, and all sorts of rules about ritual purity, and all sorts of rules about tzarat, this skin ailment, etc., etc. And then the focus of the book of Leviticus expanded into the idea of holiness, how we can be holy, how we're holy by being engaged, really, to put it simply. We're not holy by living as hermits. We're not holy by going off into the mountains or the deserts and in isolation, secluding ourselves and just communing with nature or communing with God. That's not the it's not the Torah prescription for holiness. The Torah prescription for holiness is to raise the world up, to raise the material things up, and to raise one another up through engagement, through being there for one another, through using our physical surroundings to and bringing them closer to HaShem. That's when with the food we eat, the food we don't eat, with the blessings we make. It's all for the purpose of raising up our existence, to make life as individuals, and life as neighbors and neighborhoods, and life as communities, and life as a nation, to bring it up, make it more holy. And now, I should say, last week's parsha then began to talk about the Luach Ivri, the Hebrew calendar, the reminded us of the holidays that are celebrated in the land of Israel. And this was a reminder, really, or a preparation for entering into the land. The people they've been now a year in the wilderness. They have received the Torah. They've built the tabernacle. They have gotten all the instructions for how to live a Torah society, be a Torah nation. And what's next? What's left but to enter into the land? So that's what's the book of Leviticus is leading up to. And so last week's review of the different holidays, all the different holidays of the year, was sort of an alert. We're about to go in. Let's a little refresher. Let's remember what's going to happen when we go into the land. And that reminder, not just a reminder, but we learn a whole lot of new things in Parshat Behar, which means at the mountain. Let's read the first few verses from it in Hebrew and English, and I think you'll know in a minute what we're going to be talking about. This is Leviticus chapter 25, verse 1. V'yidaber HaShem el Moshe Behar Sinai lemor. דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם כי תבואו אל הארץ אשר אני נותן לכם ושבתה הארץ שבת לשם 6 שנים תזרע שדך ו6 שנים תזמור כרמך ואספת את תבואתה ובשנה השביעית שבתון יהיה לארץ שבת להשם שדך לא תזרע וכרמך לא תזמור את צפיח קצירך לא תקצור ואת ענבי נזירך לא תבצור שנת שבתון יהיה לארץ והייתה שבת הארץ לכם לאוכלה לך ולעבדך ולאמתך ולשכירך ולתושבך הגרים עמך ולבהמתך ולחיה אשר בארצך תהיה כל תבואתה לאכול וספרת לך 7 שבתות שנים 7 שנים 7 פעמים והיו לך ימי 7 שבתות השנים 49 שנה ועברת שופר תרועה בחודש השביעי בעשור לחודש ביום הכיפורים תעבירו שופר בכל ארצכם וקידשתם את שנת 50 שנה וקראתם דרור בארץ לכל יושביה יובל היא יהיה לכם ושבתם איש אל אחוזתו ואיש אל משפחתו תשובו. Hashem spoke to Moshe on Mount Sinai, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land that I will give you, the land shall observe a Sabbath rest for Hashem. For 6 years you may sow your fields, and for 6 years you may prune your vineyard, and you may gather in its crop. But the 7th year shall be a complete rest for the land, a Sabbath for Hashem. Your field you shall not sow, and your vineyard you shall not prune. The aftergrowth of your harvest you shall not reap, and the grapes that you had set aside for yourself you shall not pick. It shall be a year of rest for the land. The Sabbath produce of the land shall be yours to eat for you, and for your slave, and for your maidservant, for your laborer, and for your resident who dwells with you. And for your animals and for the beast that is in your land shall all its crop be to eat. You shall count for yourselves 7 cycles of sabbatical years, 7 years, 7 times. The years of the 7 cycles of sabbatical years shall be for you 49 years. You shall sound a broken blast on the shofar in the 7th month, on the 10th of the month, on the day of atonement. You shall sound the shofar throughout your land. You shall sanctify the 50th year and proclaim freedom throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be the Jubilee year, Yovel, Shanat HaYovel. It should be the Jubilee year for you. You shall return each man to his ancestral heritage, and you shall return each man to his family. It shall be a Jubilee year for you. This 50th year you shall not sow, you shall not harvest its aftergrowth, and you shall not pick what was set aside of it for you. For it is a Jubilee year, it shall be holy to you. For that from the field you may eat its crop. In this Jubilee year you shall return each man to his ancestral heritage. And it goes on, Torah goes on and on. There's a whole lot of things to talk about concerning the Jubilee year, because it creates certain situations that have to be worked out. How exactly do people, loans are to be forgiven, and so how does that work? And of course, the two main things, the two most prominent aspects of the Jubilee year is that they use the word slaves, but it really refers to indentured servants. Indentured servants were either people who had no way of supporting themselves, and so they entered into being an indentured servant of their own accord, or people who, I believe, certain crimes, your sentence was to become an indentured servant, and on the 50th year you go free. Of course, we also learned much earlier on that you can go free after the 6th year, and the 7th year you can go free every 7th year. But certainly in the Jubilee year, everybody goes free. And that year kicks off on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, which is the 10th day of the month of Tishrei, the 7th month. And people's land, the land is returned to them, the original owners. And of course, in the times of the tribal inheritances, this was also very crucial. So it's a very interesting, fascinating way of sort of balancing the scales again. If every 49 years people and lands are freed up and things go back to their former status, it creates, I guess, a more equitable society. Again, it's just sort of resets the program. It's very fascinating, and it's very crucial. And again, it's made up of 7 consecutive Shemitah cycles. And of course, the Shemitah is the sabbatical cycle, which we've read about already in the book of Leviticus. Briefly, we'll read about it more again later in the Torah. But and the language here also is very reminiscent. You shall count for yourselves 7 cycles of sabbatical. Is very reminiscent of the period that we're in right now, the Sfirat Omer. Usfartem lechem mimochrat Shabbat miyom aviachem etum atnufa sheva Shabbatot miotiena. You shall count for yourselves 7 weeks of 7 days. That's the Omer that we're currently involved in. And so 7, of course, we know is a very, very significant number in Judaism, in the Torah. And the number after 7, 8, is always sort of has an above nature, a supernatural aspect to it. And of course, in this case, the 8th year is that Jubilee year, because it's the 8th year after the conclusion of the 7 cycles of 7 years. And it must have been an amazing experience. Now, what about the Jubilee year today? We aren't currently observing the Jubilee year, and there's halachic reasons for that. One of those reasons is it's observed when the majority of the Jews throughout the world live in the land of Israel. And I think we're coming very, very close to that point. How exactly it will be observed, I think it's going to take some time to work out. And, you can work things out in theory, but when you have to work them out in a modern society in real terms, it takes, I think, a lot of trial and error. Of course, we have a body of of knowledge that can help us, but trial and error is still probably going to be the key. We do observe the Shemitah years, and there are some workarounds for those who have a harder time observing it, but more and more farmers are observing it in the strict sense of the observance. And it's very important, and we even learn that in this week's reading, that it's crucial. It is crucial for us to observe the Shemitah, the sabbatical year, and for us to observe the Jubilee year in order to remain in the land of Israel. And this brings up a whole other aspect. Again, as Israel is getting ready to enter into the land of Israel, and once again, this is before the debacle of the spies, which caused a delay of 39 years before entering the land. Israel was scheduled to be entering very soon at this point in our story. So they're learning now that up till now, Israel's had a partnership with HaShem, a partnership with the Torah that we received at Mount Sinai, and now there's a new partner being added to the family, and that is the land of Israel. And itself, it's a living thing. It's almost as if it has a soul. I mean, it takes a Sabbath rest. It needs to have a Sabbath rest each 7 years. It needs to have a Sabbath rest on the 50th year. It has to be respected. It has to be cared for. It has to be treated properly. It's not simply a place to, for us to rest our feet. It has holiness. It has meaning. And again, it's part of, we have to have a living, responsible, caring relationship with the land and for the land. For the land, as in we need to take care of it and protect it, and with the land, and as we need to nourish it and appreciate it and receive its bounty, its gifts. And to know when to stop working the land. We're not given a reason why, other than that the land deserves to have a Sabbath. Now, some people might say, there's a science to this as well, because we all know that if you let the land lie fallow for a year, then it will replenish itself in terms of its nourishment and minerals and et cetera, and that may be. But we are told about it, and again, it's discussed in great deal all throughout the very short parasha, the very short Torah reading of Behar, which then goes on to Behar-Bechukotai, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. We only have another moment, so we're really not going to talk about it. But I'm just going to read mention the final verses of Behar in chapter 25, verse 55. For the children of Israel are servants to me. They are my servants, whom I have taken out of the land of Egypt. I am HaShem, your God, meaning they can't be anybody else's servants. They're my servants. You shall not make idols for yourself, and you shall not erect for yourself a statue or a pillar. And in your land you shall not place a flooring stone upon which to prostrate oneself. For I am HaShem, your God. My Sabbaths shall you observe, and my sanctuary, my temple, shall you revere. I am HaShem. And from these words, from this pasuk, from this verse, where it says, my sanctuary you shall revere, in Hebrew, umikdashi tira'u, we learn the mitzvah of Mora Mikdash, showing reverence to Hashem in the place of his Mikdash, the place of his temple, which is something that we do. We follow the rules to do this, because there are rules when we go up to the Temple Mount, even today. Thank you so much for being with me. Temple Talk.